I remember the night vividly, as if it were yesterday, though I wish I could erase it from my memory. It was December 14th, 2019. I was driving down a rural road, a long stretch of highway, where the speed limit was 70 miles per hour. The darkness was thick, the kind that seems to swallow the headlights and makes you strain to see just a little bit further. I had just passed a car parked on the shoulder with its flashers on. My first instinct was to move over into the second lane to give the parked car some space. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the road was empty except for us. Out of nowhere, I saw a flash of white in my lane. My brain barely registered it. It looked like a trash bag, something that should have been harmless. I had just enough time to think, what's a trash bag doing here? Before I felt the thump beneath my truck. It didn't feel like much, but enough to make me glance back in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I considered not stopping. It was late, I was tired, and I just wanted to get home. But something about that parked car made me pull over. I had to make sure I hadn't caused any damage or flung debris at the other vehicle. As I approached the car with the flashers, a woman stepped out, looking as pale as a ghost. I asked her what I had hit, expecting her to say it was just some garbage or maybe an animal. Her words, "It was a person," hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. Stunned, I ran to where he lay. He was in the middle of the road, in the second lane. He had been screaming for help, but now he was silent except for his labored breaths. I realized I had to stop traffic and prevent anyone else from hitting him. I waved down an oncoming car, desperate to keep them from making the same mistake I did. I kneeled beside him, my hands shaking as I reached out to hold his. He looked so young, too young. Blood pooled around him, and I could feel his life slipping away. He cried, and I cried with him, feeling utterly helpless. In those few minutes, all I could do was be there with him, share his pain, and hope he knew he wasn't alone. The aftermath was a blur of police lights, statements, and the numbing realization of what had happened. The investigation revealed the horrifying sequence of events. He had picked up a hitchhiker, who attacked him and pushed him out of the moving vehicle. He had been lying there, calling for help, when I hit him. They never caught the hitchhiker. I wasn't charged with anything once the details were clear. The woman who had called the police never tried to stop me or move him. Maybe she was too scared. Maybe she thought she was doing enough by calling for help. I couldn't shake the image of his young face or the sound of his cries. I paid for his funeral, hoping it would bring some solace to his family and some closure to me. His family reached out, not with anger but with a need for closure. Their understanding and sympathy cut deeper than any harsh words could have. They wanted to know what happened, and I told them everything. Since that night, I haven't been able to drive at night. Panic attacks grip me if I try, and memories flood back. I've become adept at suppressing it, but it's always there, lurking. Road debris sends me into a spiral, especially garbage bags. I have to stop the car, trembling and gasping for breath, unable to move until the wave of panic passes. Depression follows, a shadow that lingers for days until I manage to push it back down again. It's a cycle I've come to know too well. I try to move on, but that night will always be a part of me, a scar that never fully heals. Alex and his friends decided to go camping in the dense and remote Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. They were experienced campers, always seeking new adventures and the serene isolation of nature. This trip, however, would be one they'd never forget. They arrived at their chosen campsite in the late afternoon. The sun was still high, casting warm golden light through the thick canopy of trees. The air was fresh with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Everything seemed perfect for their getaway. They quickly set up their tents, gathered wood for a fire, and settled in as the evening approached. As darkness fell, they huddled around the campfire, sharing stories and laughing, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows around them. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, creating a symphony of rustling leaves, distant howls, and chirping insects. Around midnight, just as they were preparing to retire to their tents, a sudden rustling in the bushes nearby caught their attention. They paused, listening intently. It was unusual, but not entirely alarming. They were, after all, deep in the forest where animals roamed freely. But then, without warning, a rock came hurtling out of the darkness, landing with a thud near their campfire. The friends jumped up, startled and confused. They scanned the tree line with their flashlights, expecting to see an animal or perhaps another camper playing a prank. But there was nothing. "It must be some kids messing around," Tom suggested, trying to calm the group. They decided to ignore it and went to their tents. But as the night deepened, the sounds became more frequent and closer. Rocks were thrown sporadically, each one landing unnervingly close to their campsite. The initial shock turned into a creeping fear. Something was out there, and it seemed to be targeting them. Determined to find the source, Tom and Alex grabbed their flashlights and ventured into the darkness. Their beams cut through the night, revealing nothing but dense forest. The usual sounds of wildlife were eerily absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. They found no evidence of anyone nearby. No tracks, no signs of another campsite. Returning to their camp, they tried to reassure the others, attributing the incident to animals dislodging rocks. However, the feeling of being watched persisted. The group huddled together, too scared to sleep, listening to the continued assault of rocks hitting the ground around them. As dawn approached, the rock throwing ceased, and the forest seemed to return to its normal state. Exhausted and unnerved, they decided to pack up and leave. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had been targeted by something or someone who didn't want them there. Weeks later, Alex did some research and discovered that their campsite was near an area known for strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. He couldn't help but wonder if they had encountered something supernatural that night. The experience left them all shaken, a chilling reminder that sometimes the wilderness holds secrets better left undisturbed. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go camping in the mountains. We wanted to get away from everything, just us and nature. We picked a spot way off the beaten path, far from any trails or other campers. It was perfect, quiet and isolated. On the second night, we were hanging out around the campfire when we noticed a faint light flickering through the trees. It was weird because we were sure we were alone out there. One of my friends thought maybe someone needed help, so he went to check it out. He walked toward the light, but as he got closer, it went out. Confused, he called out, but there was no answer. He came back to the fire, and we all laughed it off, figuring it was our imaginations playing tricks on us in the dark. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard footsteps around our campsite. At first, we thought it was just an animal, but the steps were too steady and deliberate. Then we heard soft humming, like someone was singing quietly. I peeked out of the tent and saw a man standing by our campfire. He was tall, with messy hair and dirty clothes, and he was smiling this creepy, wide smile that didn't reach his eyes. The humming was coming from him. We whispered among ourselves, trying to figure out what to do. The guy just stood there, smiling and humming, swaying a little. We decided to confront him, hoping he would leave if he saw us. As we stepped out of the tent, he stopped humming and just stared at us, still smiling. We asked him what he was doing, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he started walking toward us, his smile growing even wider. We backed away, realizing this was really bad. The man kept coming, and we could see his eyes were wide open, almost bulging out of his head, and he was still smiling. Terrified, we grabbed what we could and ran to the car, leaving our campsite behind. We could hear him running after us. We got in the car, slammed the doors, and sped off. As we drove away, we saw him standing at the edge of the forest, still smiling, watching us go. We told the park rangers the next day, but they never found him. We never went back to that campsite. Even now, I can't forget his creepy smile and that humming.